The evening was quiet. The light from the candle on the table emitted a soft halo, as if the space was also breathing softly. Outside, the wind whistled through the bamboo trees, making a rustling sound like a whisper of time. Welcome to another journey together. The narrator's voice sounds warm, slow. Tonight, we will explore the ancient wisdom that Buddhist teachers have cherished for generations. The wisdom that calms the restless mind and fosters deep peace. He paused, as if to give the listener time to take a breath. If you want, he said, let me know. Where are you hearing from? At what time, in the midst of this hurried life? A moment of silence passed. Then the narrator continues, his voice as light as a stream. I will tell you a collection of Zen stories, stories that have led countless people to inner tranquility, to the most peaceful rest they have ever known. Each story is a jewel of wisdom, awakening the innate capacity in your soul, the ability to let go of worry and stress. He said, with a smile that the listener could feel even if he didn't see his face. The special thing is that these teachings do not require you to be a meditator, nor do you need to have read sutras or meditate for 100 days. They work as simply as breathing, as long as you listen. Even if your mind is in turmoil, he continued, even if you have ever struggled with insecurity, remember the Buddha's words, peace arises from within. Don't look for it outside of yourself. Tonight, we're going to dive into that meaning. You will see why peace is not something to be achieved, but something to be realized. The narrator takes a deep breath, then exhales softly. Now, he said, relax your shoulders. Inhale gently and exhale very slowly. Feel your body slowly settling in silence. The sound of breathing seemed to blend with the sound of bamboo shaking outside the door. When you let go of that breath, he said, you just open the door to a wisdom that has been waiting for you for centuries. And this is the first story, the story of the unexpected nature of enlightenment. Tokyo, late 19th century. The city is changing its skin. Dirt roads become paved avenues. The sound of ancient pagoda bells is mixed with the sound of rickshaws and the sound of early morning sales. In the haze, in the middle of bustling central Tokyo, there is still a small temple that holds an ancient soul, where two Buddhist masters lived two seemingly diametrically opposed lives. One was Uno, a strict monk in the Shingon tradition. His life is an example of discipline. Every morning, he wakes up before dawn to meditate. He only ate until before horse time and never, not even once, let the wine touch his lips. His every breath, every step seems to be measured by the precepts passed down through generations. The other was Tanzan, who had been a professor of philosophy at Imperial College. He lived a liberal life, even so liberal that he was considered traitorous. When he was hungry, he ate. When he was tired, he slept. When Tam was excited, he poured himself a cup of sake, raised it to salute the moon, and laughed. Many said he was mocking Buddhist discipline, but those who spoke to him noticed in his eyes a deep silence that could not be described. One autumn afternoon, Uno visited Tanzan. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's the desire to be sensitive. He entered the simple room where the incense blended with the sunlight filtering through the paper doorframe. Tanzan sat there, holding a wine cup in his hand, and smiled. Hello, brother. Sit down. Drink a cup with me? Uno frowned slightly. I never drink, he replied, his voice firm. Not a single drop ever touched my lips. Tanzan lifted the cup, and the light reflected on the wine like liquid gold. He took a small sip and looked at Uno, his eyes both playful and compassionate. People who don't drink, he said, aren't even human beings. Uno was startled as if he had been slapped. His face was flushed, and his voice trembled. What do you mean? Do you think I'm not human just because I don't drink? Tanzan smiled, his eyes as soft as water. It's not. I said, you are a Buddha. The room was silent. The incense was faint. Uno lowered his head, and in that moment, something in his heart melted. The narrator paused, his voice as light as the wind. This seemingly small story, he said, hides a great lesson about freedom and the nature of enlightenment. Then he continued, the Buddha once taught, holding anger is like holding a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at others. You are the one who gets burned. Uno held the coal in his hand. He was angry because he felt offended, but in reality, he was just defending the perfect image he had built himself. He paused, his voice lowering. So do we. In life, we set ourselves rules. I have to meditate every day. I just eat clean. I must never lose my temper. Then we use those same rules to measure our self-worth. When someone touches that image, I get angry, just like Uno was angry with Tanzan. A light breeze blew through. The narrator laughs. Actually, Tanzan's carelessness hides a deep intellect. He did not need to prove that he was enlightened. He did not try to appear holy. He only lived fully, without strings attached. And it is in that freedom that Buddha nature shines. The irony, he said, is that in the moment of Uno's anger, he showed such an absolute passion for the path to enlightenment that even a single word of disdain for morality set his whole being on fire. Zen master Hangpo once taught, fools deny what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see. Uno rejected what he saw, freedom in Tanzan, simply because he clung to what he thought of an exemplary Buddhist. But Tanzan, overcoming all prejudices, recognized the Buddha nature that shone in Uno's own humane reaction. The narrator inhaled slowly and then continued. That story teaches us something profound. Enlightenment is not about being perfect. It doesn't mean that we have to always be calm, always in control, always on the right track. Sometimes, awakening comes from the very moments we are most honest, whether it's anger, confusion, or weakness. He quoted the Buddha. 3 things cannot be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Your Buddha nature is the same, he said. It cannot be concealed by the attempt to appear spiritual, nor can it be overshadowed by your imperfections. It shines through the way you stay true to yourself. Outside, the Tokyo night was deep. The wind carried the scent of pine needles, of kitchen smoke in the distance. The narrator looks at the burning candle, his voice becoming close as a whisper. Tonight, when you close your eyes, ask yourself, are you clinging to the image of the good man, the awakened, the peaceful person, forgetting the simple fact that you just need to be yourself? Look, he says, you can realize that it's the intense emotions, joy, sadness, anger, that open the door to your true nature. The passion for the truth, even if it manifests imperfectly, is the sign that the Buddha nature is alive in you. He smiled. The Buddha said, you're as perfect as you are, and you can still use a little bit of improvement. The narrator bowed his head and gently blew out the candle. So there, he said, a teacher who keeps strict precepts and a man who is as free as the wind, seemingly opposites, but they all walk the same path. A person seeks the Buddha through discipline. The other person seeks the Buddha through freedom. They're both learning to let go. Let go of the notion of who I am. His voice grew smaller, as if in the night, and you, who are listening, are also on that journey. Wherever you are, whether your mind is static or moving, just realize one thing. Peace is not the destination. It is your own nature. He paused. A long, warm, and full silence. Now, he said, take a deep breath and exhale gently. Let your soul drift in that stillness, where there is no right and wrong, no holiness, only truth breathing with you. The night ended. Inside, a lamp is still burning, the lamp of awareness, lit by an ancient story between 2 very ordinary people. And perhaps in that moment, the listener also felt something soft spreading in his heart. Not knowledge, not a lesson. It's just a feeling of being back. The path to enlightenment often requires us to accept a subtle paradox, both honoring the Buddha nature inherent in each person and appreciating the challenging human journey to understand it. Now, let's move on to another story. The story of the courage to be true to ourselves, even in the face of worldly judgment. It's the story of Shan and his mother. amidst the mountains of ancient Japan, where mist hugs hundred-year-old pine groves and the sound of temple bells rings through each valley. A young monk named Shoan is faced with a choice that could shape the entire spiritual path of his life. Among the misty mountains of ancient Japan, where the sound of the temple bells in the morning melted into the white clouds and the rows of old pines stood silent as a witness of time, there was a young monk named Shoan. His life seemed to go by like many other monks, in meditation, in scriptures, in strict rules. But then, an incident caused his path to turn in a different direction, one that no one expected. Shoan's father died early, leaving his elderly mother who could only rely on her son. According to common sense, Shoan could have sent his mother to relatives to take care of him, and then went to a large temple to devote himself to his cultivation like many other young monks. Society expects that from you. The masters advise the same. But his heart couldn't do that. He chose love over convention. Where there is Shoan, there is his mother. Together they traveled everywhere, to monasteries, distant temples, high mountains where the hermit monks retreated. Because of his special circumstances, Shoan could not live in the clergy community. So at each stop, he built a small hut, so simple that it was just enough to cover the rain and sun. To make a living, Shoan copied the sutras. His every stroke was like still breaths, steady, patient. He was paid small sums of money, enough to buy rice, some vegetables, and occasionally a fish for his mother. One morning, when Shoan brought the fish back from the market, whispers suddenly arose around him. "Look," someone whispered, "a monk buy fish." The other person chuckled. "What kind of Buddhist teacher eats meat?" The gossip spread quickly, like a straw fire. In their eyes, Shoan's action was an affront to the precepts. A monk who eats salty, and he is even open in the middle of the market. But Shoan just bowed his head and walked in silence. He understood his mother needed that meal, and his filial piety cannot be overshadowed by prejudice. However, the old mother is different. She heard the gossip and felt her heart tighten. She was in pain not because of herself, but because of her son. "People think badly of you," she said, her eyes rolling. "It's all because of me." One afternoon, she gently came to Shoan's side. "Son," she said quietly, "I think I should be ordained. I will become a nun, a vegan, so that no one will have a reason to judge me anymore." Shoan looked at his mother, his eyes filled with tenderness. He understood that the decision came from love, but in his heart there was still a silent sadness. However, he did not object. And so the old mother shaved her hair, put on a brown shirt, and studied with his son. Mother and daughter practiced the Dharma together. The relationship between them is not because of the Dharma, but distant. On the contrary, it becomes even more sacred. Shoan is musically gifted. He has been playing the harp since childhood. When his mother also learned to play, they began to weave melodies together in the moonlight. On full moon nights, silver light overflows through the pine canopy, covering the small roof. The sound of the harp sounded, both pure and gentle, like a stream flowing through a deep forest. The mother and daughter sat together, sometimes without saying a word, letting the music speak for filial piety, for peace, for love. One evening, as the sound of their piano echoed in the wind, a young girl passed by. She paused, silent. The melody seemed to pierce her heart, both sad, pure, and strangely peaceful. She stood outside the cottage until the music ended. The next day she went to Shoan and bowed her head politely. "Sir," she said, "your music is beautiful. Please come to my house so that everyone can hear the sound of the piano." Shoan smiled. He accepted, not because of his reputation, but because he saw that the girl's heart was full of goodwill. That night, he came to her house, played the piano all the time, bringing with him the simple joy of sharing beauty. A few days later, when he happened to meet her on the road, Shoan bowed his head and thanked him. "Thank you for welcoming me. What a pleasant evening." The girl responded with a shy smile, and then walked away. But the eyes out there don't miss anything. one whispered. The two talked. Then the whole town began to stir. He went to a woman's house. Didn't he know who she was? She works in the amusement park. What a disgrace. A monk who visits a prostitute. The words have a tone that is both moral and pleasurable. They spread as fast as a poisonous wind. Shone heard it, but he wasn't angry. He knew his heart was pure. He only shares music and compassion, not caring about the profession or status of the other person. He still lives quietly, still copying sutras, still singing with his mother at night. And time, as always does, has calmed all the waves. One gradually recognized in Shoan an unusual quality, an unshakable calmness, a compassion that knew no boundaries. His spiritual fame spread beyond the mountains to distant temples. The Zen masters invited him to teach. They called him a practitioner of love and freedom. On one such teaching trip, Shoan left his mother at home. She was weak, but still insisted on letting him go. "You must continue on your way," she said. "I will wait for you to come back." A few months later, when Shoan returned, the cottage fell silent. The neighbors stood outside, their faces stern. A person walked over and put his hand on his shoulder. "Your mother is gone. We are preparing for the funeral." Shoan was silent. He didn't cry. Slowly, he walked to the coffin, took a stick, and tapped the wooden lid 3 times. "Mom," he said quietly, "my son is back." Then he changed his voice, as light as breathing. "I'm so glad to see you're back, son." He smiled and replied in his own voice, "I'm very happy too, Mom." Turning to the bewildered mourners, he said calmly, "The funeral is over. Now you can bury it." No one understood, but no one dared to ask. In that moment, it seemed that Shone and his mother were still talking, not through words, but through love that transcended life and death. Years later, when Shone felt his breath thinning, he called his disciples back. "Today, I'm leaving this world," he said, his voice as deep and calm as autumn water. "At noon, when the sun is shining, I'll go." He lit incense in front of the altar, where there were 2 photographs, one of his mother, the other of his former teacher. The smoke of incense rises, blending into the soft light. Then he sat down, took a pen, and wrote the last poem of his life. "For 56 years, I have lived wholeheartedly, finding a way in the middle of this world. Now the rain has stopped, the clouds have dissipated, the blue sky, the full moon is appearing." As the disciples chanted around, Shoan closed his eyes slightly. The last breath came out, light as a smile. He left in silence. Shoan's life, it is said, is a testament to a great truth, that the spiritual path lies not in the observance of rituals, but in the ability to choose love over social approval. The Buddha once taught, "Hatred does not end with hatred, but only ends with love. It is the law of eternity." Shoan lived it to the fullest. He did not resist the world with reason, but with compassion. He did not run away from judgment, but stood still in the midst of it with an unshakable mind. Those of us who are listening to this story may also see our shadow somewhere in Shoan, in the fear of being misunderstood, in the desire for acceptance. We are afraid of judgment because we have lost sight of the root of our self-worth and look for it in the eyes of others. Zen Buddhism teaches that true practice is not about living according to conventions, but about being true to one's own mind. When you choose love over fear, choose compassion over praise, you have walked the path of Shoan, the path of inner freedom. And perhaps on a certain moonlit night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the harp of the mother and daughter of the old days, echoing in the pine forest, singing about a love that transcends all the limits of human life. The story of Shoan reveals 3 profound aspects of the path to mindful living. First of all, Shoan shows that true spiritual practice sometimes requires us to go beyond superficial rules in order to serve more subtle and deeper principles. His decision to stay and care for his mother, even if it meant giving up the opportunity to practice in a traditional monastic environment, was a living expression of the spirit of compassion at work in Buddhism, which becomes the path of meditation, which is the practice of mindfulness through each action of everyday life. Second, Sean teaches us how to face the judgment of others without defensiveness, justification, or reaction. When those around him criticized his choice, Sean did not argue, nor did he seek to please them. He just quietly continued to live by his sincere understanding of what was right, allowing others to have opinions without turning them into facts about himself. Here, we see the freedom of the mind. When no longer bound by the need to be praised or the fear of criticism, man becomes as transparent as the surface of a still lake. All sounds come and go, but the water does not lose its pure nature. The third aspect of Shoan's story is his relationship with his mother's death, a vivid demonstration of the Zen wisdom that love transcends all material forms. When he talks to his mother's coffin, it's not an act of madness or a denial of reality. It is an acknowledgement that the bond between two souls goes beyond the limits of birth and death. Death, in the enlightened eye, is not an end, but a transformation. As clouds turn into rain, rain into rivers, and rivers return to the sea. Zen master Suzuki Roshi once taught, "Each one of you is as perfect as you are, and even so, you can continue to improve." Sean is the embodiment of that paradox, both accepting himself fully and constantly opening his heart to growth and change. When night falls, we sit back and look deeply at ourselves, at our relationships, our commitments, our hidden fears. Do we dare to realize that the fear of being judged is the wall that separates us from true life? Can we find the courage to choose love over approval, knowing that sometimes the true spiritual path leads us in the opposite direction of the world's understanding? The Buddha once taught, "More than 1,000 empty words, just one word brings peace." Sean's whole life, after all, is the embodiment of that one word, living in silence, steadfastly, despite the empty noise of judgment around him. From Sean's story, we continue to enter a deeper layer of Zen wisdom, the universality of spiritual truth, which is not limited by religious, cultural, or verbal boundaries. In the serene garden of an ancient Japanese temple, where the cherry blossoms fall like snow and the sound of the water flowing softly in harmony with the wind, Zen master Gasan, a master revered throughout the region, welcomes seekers from all over the world. His reputation was far and wide, from monks and scholars to young people who were eager to understand the boundaries between Eastern wisdom and Western philosophy that had just been introduced during the Meiji period. One afternoon, a young student came to Gasan. He is a person who is passionate about learning, carrying in his heart many concerns of the times between traditional beliefs and new ideas. After bowing to his master with all respect, he asked, "Mr. Gasan, have you ever read the Christian Bible?" Gasan smiled gently, his eyes shining as if they reflected the light of the tea in the cup. "Never," he replied, "but read it to me." The student opened the worn-out leather-bound Bible, and his voice echoed softly in the quiet space of the monastery. He read the gospel passage according to Matthew, about faith and letting go of worries. "Look at the flowers of the field, and they do not weave nor spin yarn. But I tell you, not even King Solomon in all his glory was adorned as beautiful as a flower. Then don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself." The room was silent. Gasan listened with the full presence of the mind, as if every word were the sound of rain falling on the surface of the clear lake. When the disciple finished reading, he nodded slightly, in a low but deep voice. "Whoever utters these words, I consider him an enlightened person." The student was surprised. His eyes lit up, and then continued to read. "Ask, and it shall be given. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For whoever asketh shall be permitted, and whosoever shall seek find, and whosoever knocketh, the door shall be opened." Gasan closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath of hot tea, and smiled. "Wonderful. Whoever says those words is not far from the Buddhahood." In that simple moment, the boundaries between religions seemed to dissolve. Both men, a Buddhist Zen master and a Christian student, touch the light of living truth, which transcends all names and doctrines. The Buddha once said, "Truth has no way, for truth is life, and life is always changing." Just as the sun shines regardless of weeds or precious flowers, enlightened wisdom recognizes truth wherever it arises, in the sutras, poems, or sayings of an unknown person. However, people often erect walls of separation. We divide beliefs, positions, and assume that my path is the right way. From this arises what Zen masters call spiritual materialism, when we use the very spiritual concepts to strengthen the self rather than liberate it from it. Gassen's reaction reveals three layers of deep meaning. First of all, he demonstrates that the enlightened mind naturally recognizes the truth wherever it appears. Just as the sun illuminates all kinds of flowers, the awakened consciousness sees the same intellectual essence in all traditions, whether it be Buddhist words, biblical stories, Sufi poetry, or Hindu mantras. Second, when he says that the person who utters those words is not far from Buddhahood, Gassen shows that Buddha nature is inherent in all sentient beings, regardless of faith or background. The historical Buddha is not the only one who can be enlightened. He is only the clearest proof that man can be awakened in the midst of this impermanent life. And third, Gassen's lesson reminds us that wisdom can manifest itself from the most unexpected places. Many times, a child's innocent remark, a suggestion from a stranger, or even someone's unpleasant behavior can be a mirror of what we need to see. When we live with an open mind like Gassen, every interaction becomes a practice. Every sound can be a mindfulness bell. The Buddha once taught, don't believe anything, whether read or heard, unless it's consistent with your own reason and direct experience. This is an invitation to experience the truth for ourselves, not just accept or reject ideas based on their origins. Gassen sees in Jesus' teaching about flowers in the field the same truth that Zen still emphasizes. Let go of worries, live fully in the present. These flowers grow without effort, without force. They are simply themselves. And that is the impermanence in the spirit of Zen, natural action, not driven by the ego, but by harmony with the deep nature. Similarly, the teaching, ask and you will get, seek and you will find, knock and you will open, also reflects the unknown mind of Zen, an open, sincere attitude that is willing to ask, find, and touch the unknown. It is that mind, not limited by knowledge or prejudice, that is the door that leads us to the direct experience of enlightenment. From Shoan to Gassen, two seemingly separate stories meet in one common thing: awakening in everyday life, transcending formalities, rules, or religious names. That awareness is not in books or rituals, but in the way we take care of our elderly mother, the way we listen to another person with full presence, or the way we let wisdom from wherever it comes have a place in our hearts. Because after all, enlightenment is not something to achieve. It's something that we realize already exists. Zen master Hongpo once taught, foolish people reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see. That teaching is a guideline for the path to the truth. Gassen, another meditation master, made that wisdom clear by seeing the profound nature of Jesus' teachings rather than dismissing them simply because of religious differences. Instead of being imprisoned in prejudice, he realized that truth does not belong to any religion, but exists in every place, every word, every heart that turns to the light. In doing so, Gassen's story shows us that true spiritual understanding always begets humility, not a sense of superiority. The person who attains true enlightenment does not need to assert to himself that Buddhism is the only way, that other traditions are inferior. On the contrary, they exude the quiet confidence of one who knows that truth can be reflected in all its forms. As natural as the breath, they recognize their own enlightened nature in any teaching that carries the true spirit of the Tao. It is the expression of undifferentiated wisdom, of a tolerant mind that recognizes the truth in every sound of life. Tonight, when you encounter a thought, a person, or a situation that challenges your usual way of thinking, will you be able to open your heart like Gasson, listen to unexpected voices, and realize that maybe the truth is speaking to you in ways you didn't realize before? The Buddha once taught, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the lifespan of that candle does not diminish. Happiness is never lost when shared. Wisdom is the same, like the light of a candle, illuminating wherever it touches without diminishing the original light source. When we realize this, we begin to see that the whole world is our great teacher. From that realization, we continue our journey with another story, the story of finding sweetness in the midst of life's toughest challenges. That's the story of strawberries. In a profound discourse, the Buddha tells an allegory that fully expresses the nature of human life and the ability to find joy even in the midst of dark suffering. Imagine you're walking in a vast wilderness where danger lurks behind every tree trunk and a sense of security is like a distant memory. A man is quietly walking through a field, perhaps returning home from a long journey or seeking shelter in a strange land. Everything around him was peaceful. The sound of birds singing overhead, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. But then that peace was shattered when a terrible roar rang out, causing his blood to clot. From behind, through the bushes, a huge tiger appeared. Its eyes shone with the brutality of its predatory instinct. In terror, the man ran with his head in his head, his heart pounding so much that he could hear the beating in his ears. The tiger rushed after him, each muscle rolling up, shortening the distance between the two runners and pursuers. In desperation, the man saw a cliff just ahead. At the edge of the wall, a wild vine hangs down, sticking in the air. Without thinking, he grabbed the vine and swung down, just in time to escape from the tiger's claws above. Hanging in the sky, he gasped, thinking he had been saved. But as his eyes became accustomed to the faint light below, relief turned to despair. Below, another tiger was pacing back and forth, looking up, waiting for him to fall. Between the two tigers, the man is suspended between life and death, with nowhere to escape. Above, the tiger roared, the smell of hot breath descended, and below, the other tiger was still waiting patiently. The vine began to creak, and the thread of life seemed more fragile than ever. At that moment, two rats, one white and one black, appeared and began to gnaw on the grape stem. With each bite, his lifeline weakened. Death seemed certain. But at that moment, he discovered from a small crack in the cliff that a wild strawberry tree had grown, on which a ripe, bright red berry shone in the morning dew. Despite everything, he reached out, picked the strawberries, and put them in his mouth. The sweetness is spreading. He had never tasted anything so delicious. In that moment, there is no tiger, no more abyss, no more rats, no more fear, only the absolute presence of that sweetness, a wholeness and fullness of taste. In that moment, the man realized the deepest thing about life. The Buddha once said, "The past has passed, the future has not yet come, and life only really exists in the present moment." It is in that moment of full presence that we find freedom and peace. But why is it so hard to taste our own strawberries? Zen Buddhism explains that most of the time we live between the two tigers of the past and the future. The tiger of the past is regrets, resentments, painful memories that keep clinging to us, chasing us forever. The future tiger is the fears, anxiety, and uncertainty that await ahead. And between the two tigers, the white and black rats, representing day and night, for time, continue to gnaw at life, making us forget that right now, we are alive. Take a deep look at yourself. How many times have you been obsessed with things that have passed? A conversation you wish you had said differently, a relationship you haven't forgiven, or a lost opportunity? That is the tiger of the past. And how many times have you been overwhelmed by worries that have yet to come? an interview, a medical outcome, or insecurities about money. The future. It's the future tiger. While we fear them, time passes. White and black rats still gnaw at our day, and we miss the strawberries, the moments of life, right in front of us. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh teaches that the present moment is full of joy and happiness. If we pay attention, we will realize it. Being aware of the strawberry does not mean denying suffering or pretending that tigers do not exist. It means recognizing that even in the midst of adversity, sweetness is present. Your strawberries can be the early sunlight shining through the window, the laughter of a child, the smell of warm tea in the bright and cold, or simply the breathing in and out of the chest. These little things do not erase all suffering, but they give us the strength to go through it. The Buddha taught, if you want to know the past, look at your present. If you want to know the future, look at your current actions. Every moment present is a seed for the future. When we live fully with reality, not dragged by the past or the future, we see possibilities, resources, and well-being that we didn't know existed before. Practicing meditation is learning to develop strawberry awareness, the ability to recognize and enjoy the gifts that are available in every moment, not to hide, but to live real, not to be passive, but to act with equanimity. When we face challenges from the point of awakening, we are no longer driven by fear or exhaustion, but can look at things with gratitude. Tonight, if thoughts of tomorrow or the disappointments of yesterday come to mind, you can stop, take a deep breath, and realize the strawberries right in front of you. Be it the warmth of the blanket, the quietness of the space, or just the simple fact that you're still breathing. The Buddha once said, "There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the way." The strawberry reminds us that we don't have to wait until all the tigers are gone to smile. The sweetness of life is already there, right in the midst of the cliffs of hardship. As long as we are alert enough to reach out to pick it, to taste it, to live fully with that taste, the sweetness of life that is happening right now. Now, let's explore a Zen story about the nature of easy mastery and the subtle ways in which our minds often inadvertently interfere with authentic expression. This story is called First Principles. In the ancient capital of Kyoto, where the roofs of the temples soar to the sky and the 100-year-old artistic traditions still live on in each meticulously manicured garden, there is a revered temple called Obaku. Visitors who approach the main gate often stop in awe of a beautiful calligraphy carved into the wood above the entrance. The inscription reads, "The first principle." The strokes are strong, liberal, and delicate, so full of life that it seems that the characters are breathing, living on the surface of the ancient wood. Many art lovers and calligraphy masters from all over Japan have traveled far and wide just to see this work with their own eyes. A masterpiece that is considered a symbol of the pinnacle of Zen calligraphy. The calligraphy was created more than 200 years ago by Kosen, a master with deep spiritual insight and a natural hand to let the spirit of the Tao flow through each stroke of the pen. Yet behind that perfection is a profound story about the relationship between mastery and self-awareness, between effort and effortlessness, between mastery and letting go. When tasked with writing calligraphy for the temple gate, Kosen prepared very carefully in his studio. A young student, eager to help and also eager to prove his ability, prepared several boxes of thick black ink for him. This student was so serious that he was somewhat rigid, considering himself a critic of his master's work. When everything is ready, Kosen picks up a pen, dips it in ink, and starts drawing the first characters of the first principle. The brush moves on the paper with the precision of years of practice. Each stroke of the pen carries in it concentration, breath, and life experience. When he finished, he put down his pen and looked back calmly. The student approached, looked closely, and shook his head. "Not good," he said. "The energy in the second character is not right." Kosen didn't react, just nodded, prepared a new paper, and started again. He is more focused, aware of the flow of energy passing through each stroke, keeping his mind calm. But when the work was finished, the student said, "It's worse than before. The balance is not harmonious." And so on. The process repeats over and over again. Each discarded sheet of paper was overlapped next to the writing mat. 20 times, 40 times, then 60, 80. Each time, students point out new mistakes. Later, the criticism became more detailed and strict, and Kosin's mind became more tense. By the 84th time, his hand had moved almost in a mechanical manner, but something inside had changed. The spontaneity of the flow had been lost. The presence of the student, along with the constant remarks, instilled in him a sense of self-consciousness, which made him no longer free in his expression. And then, luck happened. The student said that he needed to go out for a while. As the door closed, Kosin suddenly felt an uncanny sense of relief. Now is the time when I can paint without being watched, he thought. But it was the thought that opened up something deeper. Free from the judgmental gaze, he felt his mind naturally become calm and relaxed. No longer burdened with perfection or impressiveness, he picked up a pen and wrote. This time, there was no effort, no stress, just the hand that automatically moved with the natural flow of energy that had been trained over the years. The ink flows on the paper like spring water flowing through a rock crevice, natural, gentle, not controlled by will. When he finished, he put down his pen, expecting nothing without judgment. When the student came back and saw the work, his eyes widened. Unbelievable. This calligraphy is different. If the previous times were marked by technique and effort, this time each stroke exudes naturalness, vibrancy, and perfect balance. The student exclaimed, "A masterpiece!" In that moment, he understood what he had not seen in the long process, that true perfection does not come from trying, but from inner freedom. Ancient Buddhist wisdom once taught, when the mind is no longer divided, the way opens. And that's the spirit of the story. When we try too hard to control, to reach perfection, the mind split into two. One part is acting, and the other is observing, judging, fearing. It is that separation that paralyzes our natural abilities. Zen Buddhism points out that clinging to the result creates a kind of subtle tension that impedes the flow of true energy. When we act with the desire to impress or please others, we are no longer fully in the present. Part of the mind is being dragged away by the worry of how we are perceived. Think back to your own experiences. Playing music, competing, speaking in public, or creating art. The best moments always come when you forget yourself, when you become one with the action. The musician is immersed in the music. The athlete is in the zone. The speaker connects with the audience with the heart. They are all in the same unconscious flow. Kosin's 84 failures are not really failures. They are necessary preparation. Each time is a step to build the foundation, train the body and mind so that when the time is right, everything. The ancestor looked at him. His eyes were both serious and compassionate, as if he was looking at a child trying to decipher the moonlight with his bare hands. "What I see," he said slowly, "are the fluctuations and wanderings of my own mind. What we don't see is right and wrong, good and bad of others. It is my seeing and not seeing." As soon as those words rang out, Shenhui felt something in him crack slightly. He still didn't fully understand, but there was a part of his mind that recognized the sheer truthfulness of that answer. In that moment, the sound of the wind blowing through the pine groves outside seemed to carry a whole other layer of meaning. After that meeting, Shenhui withdrew to his room. The pain in the shoulder remained, but it seemed to be meaningless compared to the concussion in the mind. He sat down to meditate, but for the first time, he couldn't focus on his breath or the sounds around him. Instead, he just observed the constant fluctuations in his mind, thoughts, feelings, and reactions that followed each other like small waves. He began to realize that all this time, he was only worried about seeing the outside, without ever seeing the operation of his own mind. The words of the ancestor echoed in the mind. I see the fluctuations of my mind. And then he understood that the practice is not to gain a kind of mystical vision, but to see clearly the most subtle movements of consciousness, to recognize when the mind is born, when the mind dies, when delusions arise, when judgment creeps in. In the following days, he continued to meditate with a different mindset. Instead of trying to reach a perfect non-conceptual state, he just quietly observed his mind like a person standing on the riverbank watching the water flow. He clearly saw every thought that emerged and disappeared, every fleeting emotion, every tendency to judge others. And for the first time, he realizes that every time he evaluates or compares, he doesn't really see the other person, but only sees his own image reflected in his mind. He remembered the Buddha's words, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." He understood that enlightenment does not lie in getting rid of opposites, such as seeing or not seeing, pain or not pain, but in transcending that contradiction, realizing that all experiences arise in the mind and dissolve in the mind. One evening, as Shen Hui was sitting on the porch of the temple, looking at the moon rising behind the mountains, he saw a group of young meditators having a lively discussion about true wisdom. One person says that wisdom is when one understands all the scriptures deeply. Another says that wisdom is when one reaches the realm of non-conception. He smiled, did not intervene, because now he knows that wisdom is not something that is attained by thinking, but the disintegration of the person who is thinking. The ancestor once said, "Seeing the fluctuations of the mind without judgment is wisdom." That sentence gradually became Shen Hui's breath. He began to see the difference between looking and judging. When he looked without further comment, the world became transparent. As he judged, the world became narrow. He also understood why Milo said, "I don't see the right and wrong of others." Because in the moment we define someone as right or wrong, we look at them through the lens of the ego, and that self is the source of suffering. One morning, while sweeping the temple grounds, he saw a small uncle spilling a bucket of water. Water flowed on the stone floor, and the little boy panicked, bowed his head, and apologized. His first instinct was to blame, but as soon as the thought arose, he realized it. He sees his own fluctuations in his heart, the reaction of wanting to be right, wanting to protect the image of his exemplary brother. He smiled, didn't say anything, just quietly held a broom to help him dry the floor. In that moment, he felt a strange peace, a gentle freedom when he was no longer bound by the habit of judgment. He remembered the words of Zen Master Dogen. To learn the Buddhist path is to learn about the self. To learn the ego is to forget the ego. Now he understands better than ever. Every time he sees a thought arise that is not carried away by it, he is forgetting his ego. And in that forgetfulness, there is the light of awareness. The 3 hits of the past suddenly became priceless. He realized it wasn't punishment, but a gift of awakening. The pain was just a door that opened to him, that even pain was just a phenomenon that arose in the mind, but without compromising the lucid nature of perception. Just as when negative thoughts arise, they don't defile the Buddha's mind in us. We just see them without identifying with them. And so every day, Shen Hui sat down, not trying to achieve absolute silence anymore. He only sees his mind fluctuate, sees it rest, sees it arising, sees it dissolve. But he no longer judged. He doesn't see right or wrong, good or bad in others. He only saw the river of consciousness flowing through it all. One afternoon, when the sunset dyed the ancient tile roofs red, the ancestor walked up to him. His gaze was gentle and knowledgeable. "Do you understand?" he asked. Shen Hui bowed his head deeply, tears rolling down his face. "Master Bai, now I have seen. I've seen that there's nothing to see." The ancestor smiled, the last rays of the day reflected on his face like a golden stream. "Very well. he said quietly. When you no longer find the beholder and the thing seen, then you can really see. That night, when the moon was high, Shen Hui sat in meditation alone. In the silence, he heard the wind, the leaves, and his heart beating. Every sound becomes crystal clear. He felt life spreading everywhere, in his breath, in the sound of insects, in every particle of dust flying in the moonlight. He no longer distinguishes between seeing and not seeing. It's all just an endless stream of awareness, as open as the sky. And in that moment, he understood that enlightenment is not about looking for something outside, but about going back and seeing the sight itself. There are no more questions, no more answers. There is only lightness, gentleness, stillness, like the moonlight shining without leaving a trace. Night has fallen on the small village nestled on the mountainside, as if a huge soft blanket is slowly covering every roof, every small alley, every blade of grass that is still dewy. The darkness was so dense and quiet that the sound of the wind passing through the bamboo canopies also sounded like an ancient whisper of heaven and earth. In a small wooden house on the edge of the village, a blind man was preparing to return from a long evening chatting with his best friend. They sat together for hours, sharing cups of hot tea, gentle stories, and even warm silences that can only exist between people who truly understand each other. Now, when the sound of insects began to rumble in the night, the blind man stood up, fumbled for the familiar bamboo stick, gently adjusted his robe, and prepared to leave. The friend looked at him anxiously, his eyes fixed on the dim road outside, the winding road that led to his little house at the end of the village, where only the light of a few lights crept in the distance. "Wait a minute," the friend said, and then walked into the house. After a while, he returned with a bamboo lantern in his hand, inside of which was a golden candle burning softly, emitting a warm halo. "Bring this lamp," the friend said in a kind voice. "It's very dark tonight. There are many obstacles on the road. The lamp will make you safer." The blind man smiled slightly, and his gentle face showed a glimpse of surprise and delight. "What do I bring a lamp for? You know I can't see it. The light doesn't help my eyes at all. My feet know the way, my ears hear the wind, and my nose can smell the direction of my house. I've walked this path 1,000 times in the dark, and I don't need light." The friend was silent for a moment, then replied softly, "I know, but maybe this lamp wasn't for him to see better. But let others see him. It's too dark tonight. If someone goes in the opposite direction, they may not recognize you and accidentally bump into you." The blind man stopped, his head tilted slightly as if listening to the deeper meaning of the words. Then he nodded slowly. "Ah, that's it. I get it. The lamp is not for me, but for someone else." He smiled, his voice full of gratitude. "It's so thoughtful. Thank you." The friend lit the candle a little brighter and then placed the lantern in the blind man's hand. A soft yellow light shone on his face, making his eyes blind as if reflecting a different kind of light. The light of trust and kindness. The blind man lifted the lantern, felt the warmth from the candle, and turned and walked into the night. The light from the lamp flickered in the wind, swaying rhythmically with each of his steady steps. The village road winds around like a sleeping snake. The blind man walked slowly, his familiar footsteps tracing each stone and each tree root protruding above the ground. At his feet, the light from the lamp formed a small golden circle, as if he was carrying a world of his own, warm in the middle of the vast black sea of the night. Although he couldn't see that light, there was a gentle reassurance in his heart. He thought of his good friend, of the reminder that the light is sometimes not for us to see, but for others to see us. However, just a few minutes later, in the middle of the quiet road, a rumble sounded. A stranger, hurrying away in the dark, slammed into the blind. Both staggered and almost fell. The lantern shook violently, made a creaking sound, and almost fell to the ground. "Don't you see me?" the blind man exclaimed, his voice full of frustration. I'm carrying a lantern. You should have seen its light. The other visitor, still keeping his balance, stared at the lamp in his hand and couldn't help but laugh. Hey, my friend, he said softly, why don't you light a candle? Your lantern is completely dark. The blind man was stunned. He hurriedly put his hand up and touched the lamp frame. Cold. Since when has the inner candle gone out? Perhaps the night wind was too strong, or a slight vibration was enough to quell it. He stood there, silent in the dark, his hand still holding the lamp frame. He carried it all the way, he trusting that he was carrying the light, but it was really just an empty object. A lamp that had no more fire, no more illuminating than carrying nothing. The other guest saw this and shook his head slightly. It's okay, he said. I've got a match. Then he lit a small fire, lighting the candle inside the lamp. The light returned, shimmering more than before, as if the lamp had just been awakened. The blind man felt the warmth radiating from within, smiled, and bowed his head in thanks. On the way on, each of his steps suddenly became lighter. In his mind resounded the teaching that he had heard someone tell. Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the lifespan of that candle does not diminish. It suddenly occurred to him, the light, when shared, never goes away. Happiness is the same. In silence, the blind man thought about what had just happened. He realized the difference between carrying a lamp and carrying real light. An unlit lamp is nothing more than a decoration. Just as in life, people often think that they are carrying wisdom, when in fact they are only holding on to its forms, books, words, knowledge, rituals. And the candle of direct experience has not yet been lit. He remembered people in the village who used to talk about religion, enlightenment, meditation, but still easily get angry, jealous, or proud of their knowledge. Perhaps they were also holding unlit lamps, just like he had a few minutes ago. They have bamboo frames, rice paper, candles, but lack of fire. The blind man smiled slightly, the smile of a person who had just seen in the dark. He realized that he used to be like that, believing that just having teachings, books, and teachings is enough to enlighten. But true light does not come from memorizing, but from living what we learn. Like biting into an apple, you know what the real taste is, not reading hundreds of books about apples. He slowed down, hearing the footsteps of the traveler who was accompanying him. They said nothing, just let the light from the new lamp shine in the middle of the night, on the rocks, on the puddles, on their dusty feet. In that moment, they both understood, no words. When reaching the turn, the passenger stops, bows his head, and then turns along his own path. The blind man continued to walk, but this time he held the lamp tighter. Every time the flame tilted slightly in the wind, he covered it with his hand, protecting it like a precious little creature. He knows that this light not only helps others see him, but also symbolizes the fire of awareness within every human being, something that can be easily extinguished if we forget to take care of it. On the way home, he thought of the Buddha's teachings. Better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace. He understood that wisdom lies not in the quantity of things we know, but in our ability to be true to them. A moment of true compassion, of full presence, is worth more than 1,000 theories. He remembered the first light when his friend lit a candle for him. That light is not his own, but a shared fire. He realized that intellect is the same. No one is fully enlightened on his own. I take fire from others, and then pass it on to others. Every time we learn something, we don't keep it to ourselves, but spread it like a candle that spreads light to all others without losing anything. However, he also realized another fact. Candles don't burn forever. The wind can blow it away, the wax can melt away, and even the lamp keeper can sometimes be absent-minded, forgetting to pay attention. The key is not to keep the fire on forever, but to know when it has gone out, and to have the humility to relight it. Pretending that the light was still burning while it was off, That was the real darkness. The blind man came home and put the lantern on the table. The light remains, small but steadfast. He sat quietly, feeling the warmth spread on his face, and a slight smile appeared. There was no darkness in his heart, even though his eyes had never seen light. He understands that there are lights that need not be seen with the eyes, but with the mind. Outside, the night was still deep, but in the small house, the candle was still burning. The blind man spoke quietly to himself, as if praying. May this fire not only illuminate my little room, but also light up in the hearts of those who are walking in the long night, thinking that they have the light, but are in fact still lost. Outside, the wind blew through the bamboo, making a sound like an ancient whisper. 3 things cannot be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And that night, in the small village, a lamp was still burning, shining brighter than ever, not just for the path of a blind man, but for the path of all who were learning to see with their hearts. Let us now begin another story of the fundamental truth that governs all human experience, a profound teaching from longtime meditators, and at the same time, a wise reminder that anyone who pursues the spiritual path needs to remember. This story is about a young disciple who entered the path of meditation with a sincere dedication. Several months had passed since he had begun, and every early morning as well as every evening, he sat still on his mattress, closed his eyes, trying to perform the breathing techniques that his teacher had instructed. He sat there quietly, in the silence of the small room, trying to maintain focus on his own breathing, inhaling and exhaling, watching each moment pass like water flowing through a stream. Some days, meditation gives him a sense of naturalness, lightness, and peace. The breath mingled with the stillness, and his mind felt like a quiet, unrippled lake. But recently, things have been different. Minutes of meditation that were originally quiet and relaxed suddenly became a seemingly endless challenge. He was constantly distracted, torn by thoughts about work, relationships, about small worries in daily life. Restlessness and discomfort invaded every moment of the practice, making him almost unbearable. On one particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed. His mind raced endlessly, and his body groaned from the aches and pains of his unfamiliar sitting position. His legs ached, his body stiffened, and though he tried to focus on his breathing, his mind was constantly wandering, caught up in imaginary conversations about mental problems, about physical worries, about unpleasant feelings. After a period of time that felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he let go, stood up, and decided to find his teacher, who he hoped would bring advice, reassurance, or a new method to overcome this discomfort. He found the old teacher tending to a small garden behind the meditation hall. In the gentle morning sun, the teacher bows low, pulling out each branch of weeds with meticulousness. Every gesture is full of slowness and devotion. "Master," he called, his voice full of depression and self-criticism, "my meditation is terrible. You can't focus on anything. I feel distracted all the time. My body aches constantly, and I am constantly tired even though I try to concentrate. Everything about your practice is wrong. It's terrible." The teacher looked up, his hands still on the ground, his eyes calm and full of understanding. He looked at him, listening to each complaint without any surprise or judgment, as if he had heard them countless times before. After a second of silence, he said seriously but gently, "It's going to be over." Then he bent down and continued to pluck the grass, as if nothing unusual had happened. The student stood there, a little surprised. He was expecting a detailed advice, a new method, or at least lengthy reassurance. Instead, he only received 3 simple words. Returning to his room, he pondered this confusing instruction. In the days that followed, despite his disappointment, he continued to practice meditation. Gradually, something starts to change. The intense distractions began to subside. The body gradually adapts to the sitting position, and moments of true peace begin to emerge amidst the chaotic stream of mind. Finally, after days of perseverance, his meditation changed completely. A sense of serenity, alertness, and vibrancy appears. He felt every breath, every present moment, without being dragged away by his mind. Everything seemed to be harmonious and complete. Delighted by the positive change, he turned to his master again, this time seeing him sweeping the leaves in the temple courtyard, the afternoon light shining on his gray hair and calm face. The student, his face beaming, ran over and shouted, "Teacher, now my meditation is wonderful. I feel lucid, peaceful, and alive. Your body is relaxed, your mind is clear, and you are experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about meditation is wonderful." The teacher just looked at him, as calm as before, and repeated, "It will pass." This time, the student heard more depth in that sentence. His excitement, his joy, instead of suddenly passing as before, began to be transformed into subtle understanding. He realized that the teacher was pointing out something fundamental about the nature of all experiences, not just meditation. All are impermanent. Wonderful states, unpleasant moments, all pass, not permanent. We suffer and are happy precisely because we cling to things that are temporary, trying to keep what is pleasant or avoiding what is unpleasant. Both create unnecessary suffering. The practice of meditation teaches us to develop equality with impermanence, not indifferent, but also not clinging, allowing all natural experiences to pass and learning to react in a sober and calm way. His words, "It will pass," are both a comfort and a challenge. It reminds that no state lasts forever, and also warns that we should not build identities based on pleasant moments. Students begin to see, instead of being swept away by the vicissitudes of life, that it is possible to find cognitive stability that still exists, where all experiences appear and disappear. Try looking at your own life. How much energy do you spend maintaining a good mood, a period of success, or pleasant circumstances? How much do you resist challenges, unpleasant emotions, or unpleasant situations? Both clinging and resistance create unnecessary suffering. Awareness of impermanence does not mean indifference or superficiality. It allows us to take full care of all experiences, knowing that they will pass and then find freedom in the midst of life's constant changes. The young disciple's story leads us to another lesson in acceptance and inner strength, illustrated by a famous encounter between the general and an unshakable Zen master. In feudal Japan, when civil wars ravaged the country, the armies of warlords swept through the countryside like natural disasters, occupying villages, controlling the population with violence and intimidation. When the army of a particular warlord approaches a small village, everyone runs away. Families hurriedly packed up their belongings, merchants closed their shops, and after a few hours, the street crowded with everyday life suddenly became empty and quiet. Everyone fled, except for an old Zen master who lived in a simple temple in the center of the village. The general approached the village and saw smoke still rising from the chimney of the temple. This surprised him. Who dares to stay when they've all run away? Who dared to face his soldiers without fear? The general decided to go to check, bringing some lieutenants. When they approached the temple, they saw the Zen master sitting peacefully in the garden, tending to the plants as if nothing unusual was happening around them. His hands were quietly pulling grass, stroking leaves, and his face was serene, perfectly calm. The general, accustomed to the fear and submissiveness of everyone around him, was annoyed by the old man's calm indifference. "Don't you understand the seriousness of the situation?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty courtyard. "Don't you know you're standing in front of someone who can stab you without blinking?" His hand gripped the sword that gleamed in the sun. But the Zen master still took care of a small flower bush, which did not waver. Finally, he looked up at the general with calm, fearless eyes, as if greeting an ordinary guest entering the garden. "Do you realize," he said in a calm voice, "that you are standing in front of a man who is not frightened by death?" The general stood still, his sword half drawn, and the anger gradually disappeared, replaced by astonishment. In all the years of the war, he had seen many kinds of bravery. The desperation of the cornered soldiers, the defiant fury of the defeated enemy, the foolish bravery of the young warriors. But never did he encounter a complete calmness, an absolute acceptance of death, unshaken, fearless. The general slowly returned the sword to its sheath. Without saying a word, he turned and left the temple, allowing the Zen master to continue his gardening in peace. The village was not affected by war, not by any military strategy or agreement, but by the sheer courage of one who fully accepted the impermanent nature of existence. As the Buddha taught, all things that are conditioned are impermanent. This complete acceptance brings inner strength that no external threat can subdue. The Zen master was not afraid, but he was also not indifferent. His calmness stemmed from a deep awareness of impermanence, that everything, including death, is temporary, and nothing can truly take away inner peace. The story reminds us to look at ourselves. How much of life's fear comes from clinging to circumstance, fame, or comfort? When we accept impermanence completely, external powers and threats lose their power over us. The Zen master's calm response, as the Buddha reminded, is stronger than any sword because it comes from absolute acceptance, not resistance or fear. When we look at the pressures, threats, and difficulties of everyday life, we can learn to find a quiet space in our awareness, not to be threatened by external events, and to transform fear into a steadfast presence. The story of the young disciple and indomitable Zen master is a living reminder of the impermanent nature of all experience and the power that comes when we fully accept it. Meditation is not about avoiding or apathy, but about living fully with each moment, whether pleasant or unpleasant, while being aware that it will all pass. Happiness, peace, and wisdom arise not by holding on to experiences, but by the ability to dance gracefully and the ever-changing nature of existence. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that the whole secret of existence is fearlessness. True freedom does not come from avoiding danger or avoiding external challenges, but from understanding so deep that in the end, no matter how strong external threats may be, they cannot destroy the peace inherent in our minds. As this understanding is instilled, man realizes that the true nature of freedom is an intrinsic spiritual state, independent of circumstances or materiality. It is in this context that the Zen story of the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission becomes extremely significant, as it emphasizes that awakening and awareness cannot be transmitted through mediation, but only through direct experience, cannot be copied or transformed by mere words. The story is about Bank, a prominent Zen master, and the messenger he met on his meditation path. In the bustling capital, where the markets are bustling with merchant bargaining, where scholars debate passionately in tea houses scented with green tea, Zen Master Bankai has just finished a lecture at one of the largest temples. His fame is not only because of the knowledge he possesses, but because of his ability to lead sincere seekers to their inner Buddha nature directly, without detours. Bankai kept his life and practice very simple. He walked between temples to places where sincere students gathered and guided them step by step, directly and without artificiality. As he was about to leave the temple, packing his luggage neatly, carefully double-checking the necessary items for the next trip, a well-dressed man approached. This person's shiny silk robe, polite and careful manners, suggest that he belonged to the aristocracy, or at least had frequent contact with the elite, and was most likely a subordinate or assistant to one of the noble families that supported the temple. The man bowed solemnly, his voice deep but earnest, saying that he was coming on behalf of a baron of eminent intellectuals, who had heard of Bankai's wisdom and was anxious to see him in person, But because of the urgency of his affairs, which could not be postponed, he could not come in person. He asked if Bankai could postpone a day so that the Baron could have a chance to study with him the next day. Bankai, though eager to go to the next temple where the students were waiting, recognized the sincere need in this offer. The path of a true teacher requires not only dedication, but also compassion and flexibility in the face of inconvenient circumstances. Without hesitation, Bankai replied simply that he would stay one more day. The luggage was opened. He returned to the temple grounds, spending the evening in quiet meditation, preparing for an encounter that he predicted would be incredibly profound and meaningful to a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with true humility, unencumbered by worldly status, and he wished to impart any guidance that could help them get closer to their own understanding. The next morning, the sky was clear blue and the temple bell rang, calling people into the meditation space. Bankai sat in the designated room, waiting for the appointed time. But instead of the Baron appearing, the messenger of the previous day appeared, this time with a look of embarrassment and worry on his face. He bowed his head, his voice deep sad, announcing that the Baron had been urgently called away because of the affairs of the state, which could not be delayed, but still did not forget his desire to learn Zen, and asked him to come on behalf of him to receive instructions, promising to convey Bankai's every word accurately. The man explained that the Baron's specific question relates to the nature of the mind, that he wants to understand what consciousness really is and how it can be realized directly. Bankai listened, his expression calm, his eyes full of compassion, and his deep attention. When the man finished speaking, he sat in silence for a while, not only to consider the question, but also to become aware of the whole context. The absent seeker, the messenger in good faith, and the fact that direct communication of Zen was difficult, almost impossible. Finally, Bankai responds with characteristic simplicity and directness. This problem of Zen is difficult to convey through question and answer, and it really cannot be transmitted through a messenger, no matter how dedicated and competent the messenger is. After that sentence, he was silent, without adding a word. The messenger, waiting for a hint, an alternative, was at last confused, bowed his head, and left the temple in reverence. Through this story, the profound truth emerges in the way Bankai gently but firmly refuses to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that can be carried by others. Spiritual awakening is not information that can be transferred, but inner transformation. We often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge, memorable and communicative. But Zen teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to experience directly. It's like a thirsty person drinking water. It is impossible to fully describe the taste or feeling of refreshment to others. Only when you drink it yourself, the experience becomes a reality. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reflects our universal tendency to grasp perception with the intellect, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot become the object of research, because it is the subject of the research. Trying to capture it from a distance through an intermediary is like trying to look into one's own eyes without a mirror. We often read books on meditation, study descriptions of enlightenment, seek answers about the mind, but forget to directly observe, experience, and perceive our own present. Dogen, a prominent Zen master, taught that studying Buddhism is self-study, and studying the true self is forgetting oneself. This paradox points to the profound reason why spiritual communication requires direct involvement. The ego wants to understand Buddhism intellectually, but it is this process that is the barrier that needs to be seen. The narrator in the story represents the tendency to approach awakening indirectly, the desire to understand awareness from a safe distance, while awareness is not something to possess or study, but rather our own life, experience, and presence. Bankai's silence after a brief explanation is a teaching in itself. In Zen, silence communicates what words cannot. The space between thoughts, the awareness of the breath, the space where feelings and thoughts arise, all of which can only be recognized when we stop trying to conceptualize. This does not mean that spiritual teaching is meaningless or that teachers do not have a role. In fact, the role of the teacher is to lead students to realize what they already have inside, helping them to experience awakening directly, rather than just providing descriptions or knowledge. When students know how to stop, observe their bodies, become aware of their surroundings, and become aware of their own thoughts and feelings, they truly enter the meditation experience. As the Buddha once taught, saving oneself is the most important thing, and hard work and perseverance in the present is the path to enlightenment. Bankai, through patience, compassion, and wisdom, taught that awakening cannot be shortened, cannot be carried through the words of others, but can only be realized when we experience it firsthand. The story of Bankai and the messenger reminds us that true freedom, true wisdom, and true enlightenment do not come from outside or from intermediaries, but from one's own direct perception and experience. Each person is a beacon unto himself, and any attempt to transfer direct experience can only lead to misunderstanding in the absence of authentic presence. Bankai's silence, his gentle waiting and refusal, are all life lessons in awakening that words cannot replace. Just as the taste of water is only tasted when drinking, just as light is only seen when we open our eyes, awakening can only be realized when we enter directly into our own experience, without mediation or interpretation. So the most profound message of this story is that wisdom and freedom are not things that can be carried away, remembered, or communicated. They are the state of existence within each person, which needs to be experienced directly. Every teacher's teaching, every student's question, and even the presence of people like messengers are only contexts for awakening to occur. But awakening itself can only arise from internal experience, without any intermediary means. Bankai, with his equanimity and wisdom, realized that message, leaving a living and immortal lesson for anyone who is willing to understand that true wisdom is not information, but direct awareness and inner freedom without fear. The path to freedom cannot be taken by delegation. It is not a path that can be hired by others, not a path that is shortened through mediation or through abstract teachings conveyed by others. Freedom requires your own feet, your own breath, your own full presence and willingness to look directly at what you have always been, but perhaps never really seen clearly. This is a journey of self-awareness, where every step is irreplaceable, where every experience is direct and cannot be franchised. Our next story reveals a profound truth about how excessive attachment can poison the very thing we claim to love, turning passion and appreciation into obsession and control. In the ancient Japanese countryside, where the autumn mist gently drifts over manicured estates, there is a wealthy baron who lives with an obsessive passion. His mansion stood proudly among the rolling hills, but it was the back garden that captured his heart. This is not an ordinary garden, but a place where rows of chrysanthemums are planted with almost perfect precision. Their colors range from deep purple and brilliant yellow to pristine white, each flower like a small masterpiece that reflects the baron's boundless care. He spends hours, even days, tending to each flower, meticulously studying each variety like an encyclopedic scholar, and nurturing them with the tenderness of a father to his children. His dedication is absolute. His knowledge and meticulousness reach perfection. But it is this devotion that gradually transforms from love into something darker. The baron pays more attention to his chrysanthemums than to his family, and his love becomes bound by rules and fears. His wife and children live in a tense atmosphere, knowing that one wrong step, an accidental act, near precious flowers can lead to severe punishment. Many of his subordinates felt his wrath when he accidentally damaged a flower, and the atmosphere in the mansion became stifling, full of anxiety and resentment. Every day, the Baron's love for chrysanthemums gradually becomes heavy, no longer pure joy but responsibility and pressure, turning the flowers into symbols of power and control. One autumn day, disaster struck. A loyal subordinate, who was in a hurry to complete the task, accidentally rubbed against a precious flower, ruining its perfect bloom. When the Baron discovers the flower is damaged, his rage explodes like a volcano. He roared, "Imprisoned!" And his subordinate, though unwittingly, was immediately imprisoned. This punishment seemed excessive, and the subordinate's shame and humiliation turned into desperate rage. According to the warrior rules, he decided to resist with seppuku, a suicidal bowel dissection ritual, which would rather die than suffer severe humiliation just because of a mere flower. The news of this tragedy reached the ears of Zen master Sengai, a teacher known for his deep wisdom and compassion. Understanding that the man's life was hanging because of the Baron's obsession, Sengai rushed to the estate and promptly prevented the suicide. But he knew that saving a life would not solve the deeper problem. The Baron's obsession, his blind attachment, was the source of his suffering. Sengai thought and decided on a more radical method to free the Baron from his own clinging. On a rainy night, when the chrysanthemums were at their glorious peak, he snuck into the garden with a sharp sickle. In the darkness, he chopped down the chrysanthemums, row by row, and dropped to the ground one by one that the Baron loved. Hundreds of flowers, the crystallization of years of dedication, are cut to pieces, creating a clicking sound that resonates in the quiet space. The Baron was awakened by the noise and hurriedly ran to the window to look down at his beloved garden. Grabbing the sword, he panicked and rushed into the garden, demanding to know who the intruder was and the purpose of this action. Sengai stood calmly in the midst of the devastation, surrounded by fallen flowers, without fear or remorse. He just said softly, "Even weeds like this eventually become ranks if not cut off." These words were like a mirror that reflected the truth of the Baron's perception. In that moment, his obsession shattered like broken glass. Seeing that the flowers under Sengai's hands were only weeds in his master's eyes, the Baron suddenly understood the distortion of his own mind. He wakes up like a man waking up from a feverish dream, realizing that his love for chrysanthemums has been distorted into possession, into obsession and control. From that night onwards, the Baron never planted chrysanthemums again. The lesson he realized was profound. Attachment is the root of suffering, and any attachment, even to beautiful things, can turn love into a burden. He fell in love with chrysanthemums, but his attachment poisoned that love, turning appreciation into obsession, care into control, and beauty into a source of fear for those around him. Buddhism explains that the ego always seeks security through control, trying to hold on to what is inherently impermanent. But true love is precious without holding, enjoying without possession, caring without imposing it. When love attaches, it tries to freeze beauty, turn the beloved person or thing into an extension of itself, and thus give birth to suffering. This lesson is not limited to the story of chrysanthemums. It reflects how attachment manifests itself in modern relationships. Parents who love their children excessively can stifle natural development, even though they think they are supportive. Possessive partners, in fear of loss, generate jealousy and lack of trust. Collectors are so enamored with their possessions that they lose the joy of experiencing what they own. The chrysanthemum in the story is a symbol of whatever we lift up beyond its proper place in the natural order. From career achievements, appearance, well-curated lifestyle to spiritual achievements. When we become too attached, we create suffering not only for ourselves, but also for everyone in our orbit. Zen Master Sengai has shown that sometimes the medicine needed to break clinging is radical, unexpected action to awaken us. Loss, frustration, and impermanence, though painful, serve as important teachers, helping to distinguish between sincere love and possessive attachment. The Baron not only restricted gardening anymore, but stopped altogether, realizing that the most skillful response was sometimes to retreat, to reconsider his attachment to greater freedom and wisdom. When reflecting on the story, each person may ask themselves the question, what is your chrysanthemum garden? What is something in your life that you love so much that it creates stress, control, or distress for yourself or for others? Can you appreciate these things to the fullest without clinging to them too much? The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that only three things matter: how much you love, how gently you live, and how gracefully you let go of what doesn't belong to you. True love releases what it cherishes, trusts in the natural flow of birth and death, and does not try to hold on to or control. When this is realized, true inner freedom emerges, no longer bound by ambition or obsession, and love, appreciation, and care become pure and liberating experiences. The story of the chrysanthemum garden, about the Baron and the intervention of Sengai, is a vivid illustration of how attachment can turn love into obsession, beauty into pressure, and care into control. At the same time, it is also a reminder that sometimes, in order to realize the profound truth in life, we need circumstances that shake the habit of clinging, force us to stop, look directly at our own nature, and learn to love without possession, cherish without clinging. When we understand this, we walk the path of true freedom, where every experience is learning, every loss is a lesson, and all appreciation is no longer associated with suffering or obsession, but with the freedom of the soul. The next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us, when the mind is swept away by future prospects fraught with danger, where we easily forget the present moment is the only thing that exists. This is the story of a captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a period of constant war between rival clans, there was a talented warrior who lost a fierce battle. His comrades fall all around, and defeat becomes inevitable. He was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged out of the battlefield. His armor was stripped off, his weapon confiscated, and in that moment, he felt an absolute helplessness fill his soul. That night, he was locked in a dark, cramped cell where stone walls seemed to rise from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a cold echo through his bones. As darkness envelops the room, the warrior's mind begins to race against terrifying prospects. Tomorrow would come. He knew the custom of war was clear, and terrible things would happen. The first is the interrogation, which is designed to extract information about the enemy lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to comply with the honorable demands, they resorted to torture, the same methods he had heard from other warriors. Hot irons, pieces of bamboo under his fingernails, all the horrific punishments recounted in a quiet but haunting voice. And when they've taken out all they want, or when they're tired of his silence, it's time to execute. These thoughts swallowed him. His heart was beating so violently that he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and fast. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and sleep seemed impossible to find as his mind conjured up tomorrow's scenarios so vivid that it was inevitable. Hours passed in torment, each moment stretching like a terrible eternity. The warrior walked around in the small cell, sitting against the cold stone wall, lying on the floor covered with straw. Nothing brought relief from the prospects of impending doom, which kept repeating in his mind like an inescapable nightmare. Then, in the depths of despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master at the monastery, where he had studied before becoming a warrior. These teachings came to him clearly, as if the teacher were sitting next to him, putting his hand lightly on his shoulder, reminding him that tomorrow does not really exist. It's just an illusion, a structure in the mind that we mistakenly think is real. The only reality is now, this present moment. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How can tomorrow be an illusion when every threat is so specific, too inevitable? But as he sat quietly, allowing the teachings to permeate deeply, something began to change. He noticed his breathing, realized that in this moment he was breathing, and the breathing was real. The straw underneath him was rough, but not unpleasant. He hears the wind blowing through the trees outside the window. The natural rhythm of the world continues, despite human conflicts. In this moment, he was not tortured. In this moment, he did not die. In this moment, there was only one man sitting in the cell, alive and sober. The horrors that had seemed overwhelming before now revealed only thoughts of a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a peace began to fill the warrior's soul. Breathing slows down, deepens, and the heart beats steadily. For the first time since his arrest, he smiled. His wisdom had freed him from a prison that was more restrictive than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow, where he had locked himself up for so long. Within a few minutes, the warrior fell into a peaceful sleep, no longer surrounded by terrible prospects. The Buddha once taught, if you want to know your past, look at your present state. If you want to know your future, look at your current actions. This wisdom illuminates the profound truth that the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we truly live is the present moment. Why do we torture ourselves with a multitude of scenarios about the future, things that have not yet happened and may never happen? Zen Buddhism explains that our mind evolved as a survival mechanism, constantly sweeping through threats and planning protection, and that although this ability serves us in real emergency situations, it becomes a source of distress when we confuse mental projections with reality. Take a deep look at your own experience. How much anxiety comes from vivid fantasies of future scenarios that may never happen? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're waiting for, the difficult conversation you're planning to have, all exist primarily in thought, not in current reality. The warrior's teachings show that we can perceive future challenges without letting them drain our energy and inner peace. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they turn into obsessive anxiety, they rob us of peace and discernment. As the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future has not yet been written, and it is shaped by causes and conditions that we cannot fully predict or control. The anxious mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what tomorrow would really bring. Maybe the Lord's forces will come to the rescue. Maybe other detainees will show mercy. It is possible that diplomatic negotiations will secure his release. The Buddha said, "The past has passed. The future is not here yet, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching does not encourage us to neglect our future responsibilities or avoid rational planning, but invites us to recognize where the mind is often turned, gently bringing it back to the richness of present experience. In the practice of Zen, we cultivate the so-called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness instead of being dominated by predetermined worries. When we truly live in the present, we discover resources for peace and clarity that anxious thoughts never reveal. See how the warrior's shift in attention changed his entire experience. The same room, the same uncertain future, but by returning to awareness in the present moment, suffering has turned into peace. This transformation is available to anyone in any moment of anxiety or fear, if they know how to stop, breathe, and realize the fact that the only moment we have is now. When this is understood, fear loses its power, and the soul becomes free, calm, undominated by the illusions of tomorrow or the memories of yesterday. The warrior, through his profound prison experience, learned that freedom does not come from hiding from fear or trying to control the future, but from returning to the present with full attention, identifying reality, and acknowledging what exists right now. He realized that thoughts of torture, execution, defeat in war were all just images in his mind, and it was only when he returned to his breath, felt the straw floor, heard the wind, and became aware of the present that he saw true peace. This lesson is not only for the warrior in the dark prison cells of ancient Japan, but also for anyone who is overwhelmed by fear or anxiety, reminding us that the present moment is the only place where we truly live and hold our own freedom. Tonight, as you find your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and the wisdom of his teacher. What is really happening right now? The simple experiences, the breathing, the feeling of sitting in a chair, the temperature of the air around you are all available to anchor you to reality, more than any imagination of the future. As the Buddha taught, don't live in the past, don't dream about the future, but focus our minds on the present moment where life really takes place and where we can be in touch with reality without being dominated by worries that have not yet happened. This doctrine is the key to opening the door of the prison where the warrior was once held, as well as our own prison, where the mind erects itself a multitude of non-existent threats, and where we lock ourselves up with predictions, anxiety, and fear. As we learn to return to the present moment, we realize that fear loses its strength, suffering subsides, and the soul can find peace. But the path of wisdom and awakening does not stop at realizing the present. It also warns of the dangers that pride, confidence, and complacency can create in the soul. And the next story illustrates that clearly. This is the story of the intelligent monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a cruise boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known not only for its majestic landscapes, but also for its rich wildlife. The prince, surrounded by servants and guards, entered the mountain with royal confidence, expecting the natural world to adapt to its presence, just like his subjects. As soon as the monkeys in the forest saw the royal feast, most of them panicked and ran away, gossip filling the space as dozens of monkeys climbed the highest branches. Natural instinct tells them to hide from intruders, and the forest, which comes alive with the joyful chirping of monkeys, becomes silent, leaving only the rustling sound of leaves as the creatures seek safety in the treetops. However, a monkey is still completely uninterested in the presence of royalty. It continued its acrobatic stunts with extraordinary skill, clearly indifferent to the danger on the ground. It swings gracefully from branch to branch, performing elaborate dances, displaying dexterity as if performing a natural performance, despite the presence of the prince and the guards. Each movement of the monkey is flexible, confident, showing superior intelligence compared to its companions cowering on the treetops. Prince Wu watched this performance with growing discomfort. The animal is not only fearless, but seems to be mocking the power of the royal family by ignoring the obvious threat. The monkey's confidence seemed to be a direct challenge to the prince. Determined to teach this insolent creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and fired an arrow straight at the monkey. But everyone present was surprised when the monkey skillfully caught the flying arrow, plucking it out of the air as easily as catching a falling leaf. The monkey briefly observed the arrow, then brushed it aside with indifference, as if every feat was just child's play. The prince's face darkened with anger. His archery skills are overshadowed by an animal. He ordered, "Defeat this arrogant beast." A series of arrows were shot into the air. The monkey, overwhelmed by a coordinated attack for the first time, could not dodge them all, was hit by several arrows and fell to the forest floor. Its extraordinary abilities proved useless against the overwhelming power of humans, and the prince turned to his wise companion, Yenpui, who watched the spectacle with deep understanding. "Do you see what happened?" The prince asked. This animal advertises its intelligence, believes in its skills, and thinks that no one can touch it. Remember that. Don't rely on your differences or talents when you're dealing with challenges. Yenpui took this lesson deeply. Upon returning to the kingdom, he reflects on how his achievements, skills, and reputation can create dangerous arrogance, and realizes that it is this pride that leads to the monkey's downfall. He decided to become a disciple of a humble sage, learning to get rid of everything that made him stand out or different. He renounced the pleasures that had defined his status and learned to hide every trait that might set him apart from others. Over time, through patience and practice, Yenpui cultivated a humility so sincere that everyone in the kingdom did not know what to do with him. He became so ordinary that no one noticed the difference. But it was this simplicity that made people feel a mysterious depth, a depth of his very nature, not through his appearance or his performance, but through his quiet presence, serenity, and balance. The Buddha once said, "Those who know do not speak. Those who say don't know." This story illustrates the spiritual danger of turning our wisdom, abilities, or accomplishments into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel the need to demonstrate our knowledge, qualities, or abilities? Zen Buddhism indicates that the ego tends to take our true understandings and turn them into tools to maintain differences and a sense of superiority. It is the achievements that dissolve the sense of the separate self that reinforces it, as we identify ourselves with progress or enlightenment. The story of the monkey indicates that we can develop true abilities through practice, becoming calmer, clearer insight, or greater compassion. But when we identify these qualities and use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons of self-destruction, destroying the inner balance. This ancient wisdom reveals the central paradox of spiritual development. The more real progress, the more invisible progress becomes. True wisdom naturally expresses humility, for it recognizes the interconnected nature of all existence, dissolving all grounds for feeling superior. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki speaks of the unknowing mind as the essence of the beginner mind, not ignorance but wisdom, that realizes that our conceptual understanding is only a rough expression of the vast mystery. The monkey's tragedy is to believe that its intelligence makes it special, rather than realizing that it is only a temporary manifestation of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, "It is better than 1,000 empty words that bring peace." Yenpui realized that by hiding his differences, being normal and nothing special, he had access to a deeper kind of influence, one that influenced others through his presence rather than performance. Take a look at your own spiritual journey. Do you recognize moments when your knowledge, ability, or virtue become a subtle source of pride? When we experience meditation, psychological understanding, compassionate actions, or special skills, sometimes we use it to feel different, better than others. Every time we turn our practice into an identity, we create a dangerous spiritual display, like an insolent monkey. Intelligence or ability that is originally a gift becomes a source of pride, creates the risk of self-destruction, and fades the humility that is the true nature of wisdom. Yenpui's story reminds us that true wisdom always goes hand in hand with humility, and that the greatest influence on others is not through performance or boasting, but through sincere presence, stillness, understanding, and harmony with all existence. Like monkeys, we may possess extraordinary abilities, insights, or subtle skills, but when we assimilate them into the ego and use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become a mental trap. When we identify ourselves, let go of our pride, and express our abilities in a natural, calm way, they become a means of positively influencing and deeply connecting with the world around us, like a silent light that shines without requiring attention. The story of the monkey and Yenpui is a reminder of the spiritual path, of not only recognizing the present and inner freedom, but also of approaching possibilities accomplishments, and wisdom with humility, avoiding falling into pride and conceit, so that the intellect becomes a tool of liberation instead of binding. When we practice this, we gain access to deep peace, lasting influence, and the ability to live in harmony with ourselves and all beings, without demonstration or demonstration. Tonight, as you face the inevitable complexities of modern life, try asking the question, can you tell the difference between pointing fingers and what they are pointing to? When you study spiritual teachings, when you seek guidance from masters, you may remember that words, no matter how profound, are just fingers pointing to the moon. And the moon is just the innate wisdom that is already in you. The Buddha's wisdom taught that be diligent in your salvation. But this work is not just about understanding the doctrine on an intellectual level. It is also about putting those insights into practice so that your daily life becomes the embodiment of the wisdom you have learned. Practice is not in books or theory, but in each moment, each simple action, and deep awareness of the present. Now, let's experience a Zen story about the unexpected nature of enlightenment, the story of the kitchen monk. In the serene mountains around Lake Hakone, there is a large monastery that is famous throughout Japan for its strict discipline and deep spiritual practice. Among the monks who lived here, there was a humble man named Ichi, whose life would teach us about the difference between seeking and finding. For 55 years, Ichi faithfully served in the monastery's kitchen, where he cut vegetables, tended the fire, and prepared meals for other monks. While other monks engage in formal meditation, academic debate, or even scripture study, Ichi quietly completes his work, with calloused hands and a curved back from years of service. However, he carried out all his work with careful attention, a wordless but conscious devotion. But Ichi is not an ordinary person. From the very beginning, he was given a koan, one of the paradoxical questions that Zen masters use to expand their perceptions. The famous riddle he faced was, what is the sound of a clapping hand? Day after day, year after year, Ichi wrestled with that question, trying to find an answer using logic, intuition, and every method his mind could think of. As the decades passed, he gradually saw himself as a failure, while other monks seemed to progress, gaining new insights and being acknowledged by teachers. He saw young monks coming, surpassing him in status and recognition, while he remained loyal to the kitchen and the unsolved puzzle. For 55 years, he whispered to himself as he stirred the soup, 55 years on, I still can't hear a hand when it claps. As time passed and Ichi's body weakened, he was moved to a small room in the attic, where he could rest, away from the hustle and bustle of the monastery. In the last days of his life, while lying down to watch the sunset dye the sky yellow, something unexpected happened. Gradually, the familiar weight of striving and the desire to solve the problem began to lift from his chest. The desperate need to find answers, the shame of perceived failures, all slowly dissipate like the morning mist under the dawn. Instead of intense searching, Ichi encounters a profound peace that he has never experienced before. This was not a failure, but like a gentle embrace, enveloping his whole being. The breath slowed, the noisy thought drifted away. And in this subtle silence, when there was no more question, when there was no longer a need to breathe or act, he finally heard it. The sound of a clapping hand is not a physical sound, but the essence of existence, present beneath every noise of searching. The Buddha said, "Stop cherishing ideas, and you will attain enlightenment." Ichi's story shows that enlightenment is not something we attain through effort, but something that is discovered when the last effort ends. Why do we struggle so intensely that we get in the way of the very awareness we seek? The mind creates a division between the seeker and the object, causing us to constantly gravitate towards something imaginary that exists elsewhere, at some point in the future. Like Ichi, we often miss the natural enlightenment that is always by our side. Ichi's story sheds light on the Zen concept of the beginner's mind, the primitive awareness that exists before we complicate it with goals, achievements, or ambitions. For 55 years, he maintained a simple yet sophisticated presence alongside complex spiritual ambitions. The more he tries to attain enlightenment, the further he gets away from the realization of the natural enlightenment that has always existed. So do we. We complicate natural pleasure by chasing happiness, obscuring natural love in the search for the perfect relationship, and accumulating knowledge to replace the natural wisdom that is inherent in each person. Ichi's awareness does not come from solving koan, but from letting go of the need for settlement. The applause is not a puzzle to figure out, but an invitation to take a break before starting to think. Awareness exists before the question and the answer. As you look back on your spiritual journey, ask yourself, what if it was awareness right now? That was the enlightenment you were seeking. The sound of a clapping hand may be closer than you think. In listening to all sounds, including silence, the Buddha taught that peace comes from within. Sometimes the greatest achievement is the willingness to stop achieving and simply rest in what is always present. From here, we move on to another story about the difference between submission and true understanding, between coercive power and natural cooperation. This is the story of the proud priest and gentle teacher, Bankai. Master Bankai is a well-known Zen master in the region. Unlike other teachers who often use complex reasoning or quote lengthy evidence from the scriptures, Bankai speaks directly from the heart of the listener. His words were simple but profound, accessible to both farmers and scholars, easy to understand but not superficial. His popularity began to trouble a priest from the Nisharin sect, who was proud of his knowledge and power in his community. The priest's temple became deserted when the worshippers left to listen to Bankai's teachings. The priest prides himself on his ability to debate and his theological knowledge, so he feels offended that a person can simply draw a crowd in with soft words. Determined to expose Bankai's shallow teachings, Father Nitaran rushed into a sermon, storming through the crowd with a rolling robe and a stern face. The quiet atmosphere immediately tensed as he shouted, "Hey, Zen master, I have something to tell you." He saw Bankai as a street performer, unworthy of respect. Bankai, however, was calm, showing no signs of discomfort or defensiveness. His gentle eyes turned to the priest, giving him the same attention as anyone who approached. "All these people will obey you," the priest continued, in a louder, defiant voice. "But I won't. Can you get me to obey you?" The crowd held its breath, waiting for an angry reaction or rebuttal that would teach the challenger a lesson. But instead, Bankai smiled, warm and curious. "Please come to my side, and I'll show you." The priest, confident with pride, proudly walked to the front of the hall. Bankai gently told him to move to the left to hear better, and the priest complied. A small, reasonable request, but no one forced it. Bankai continued, gesturing to the right. The priest once again automatically complied. All actions take place naturally, without rhetoric or coercion. Bankai observed with a deeper smile, eyes gleaming with gentle delight. The priest, who considered himself superior, showed a natural willingness to cooperate. As he sat down, the priest realized his entire argument and attempt to show his power had dissipated, not by force or intelligence, but by his own natural behavior. The crowd witnessed this extraordinary moment. Not failure, not humiliation, but gentle revelation, showing that true influence did not come from power, but from the invitation to natural cooperation. The priest felt the arrogance and anger dissipate, replaced by curiosity. How did this simple man turn confrontation into understanding without asserting power? When Bankai began to preach, his words passed through the analytical mind and went straight to the priest's heart. For the first time, he listened not to find errors or prepare to criticize, but only to listen. The Buddha's wisdom taught, True obedience is not blind obedience, but conscious harmony. This ancient wisdom points to the difference between compliance from fear and social pressure, and natural cooperation that arises from true understanding. Zen Buddhism shows that power is not about dominating, but about recognizing human nature and inviting cooperation from itself. The priest came in the hope of domination, but met a man who only invited natural cooperation, which changed his view of power. In life, positive leaders don't force respect. They earn it by calling out the best in others. Compulsory compliance creates resentment and resistance, while voluntary cooperation creates real change. In our everyday relationships, we also often fall into the priestly trap, approaching conflict with the assumption that we must subdue others in order to get what we want. We are prepared to argue, we are defensive, and we are ready to fight. But as Bankai points out, if we assume the best in others and invite their natural wisdom to emerge, the result will be different. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "When others make you suffer, it's because they suffer deeply within themselves, and that pain overwhelms them." The priest's aggression comes from insecurity and inner fear. Bankai's talent is to look past the hostile surface to recognize the pain below, reacting to pain instead of aggression. Not passive, not ignoring, but redirecting confrontational energy into constructive things. He turned the power conflict into a living lesson, demonstrating the Buddha's words, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred. Only by not hating can hatred be appeased." This principle applies to all forms of conflict. When we encounter resistance with resistance, we create tension. When we encounter resistance to understanding, we create space for transformation. Tonight, as you reflect on your relationships and situations in life, when you feel the need to assert your will or defend your position, remember the gentle teacher who does not give orders, but receives full cooperation. Can you invite others to let their natural wisdom emerge instead of trying to overpower? As the Buddha observed, in compassion is the greatest suffering of the world. In compassion is the real strength. True authority does not come from the power to make others obey, but from the wisdom that helps them discover their natural desire to cooperate, to create something beautiful together. The stories of Ichi, the index finger, and Bankai show aspects of the spiritual journey. Awareness is present before knowledge. Enlightenment comes when effort ends, and influence comes from compassion and wisdom rather than from pressure. When you observe the fingers pointing and the moon they point, when you recognize the sound of a clap hand, and when you invite natural cooperation instead of force, you are learning to live in the wisdom of presence, natural peace, and true strength. In every moment, every breath, you can practice this simplicity, where freedom and enlightenment are no longer something far away, but exist right in your own normal awareness. And so, every question, every challenge, every surprise on the journey becomes part of a profound lesson, inviting you to rest in the being, natural, and full nature of life. Time, as usual, continued to pass, and the sharpest grief began to subside. The man finds himself gradually being pulled back into the world of the living, where the presence of others, of joy and sorrow, continues to flow like a relentless river. One afternoon, at a local market, he met another woman, a gentlewoman, with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Although his heart still carries the memory of his deceased wife, he cannot deny the feeling of being attracted to this new person. The conversation started out as just polite words, but then slowly turned into friendship. And from friendship, affection arises naturally, like green sprouts rising from the ground after a rain. Eventually, the man realizes that he is in love again, although guilt and inner conflicts still haunt him. The night he and his new love got engaged, his worst fears came true. As he lay on the bed in the room at night, the air suddenly became cold. In front of him appeared an unmistakable familiar figure, his deceased wife. Her face was pale, her eyes gleaming with accusation. You broke your promise to me. Her voice was as cold as a tomb. You betrayed our love and disgraced my memories. But what really scared the man wasn't just her appearance. It was perfect, seemingly infinite knowledge that she held. Night after night, she came back to torment him, recounting exactly every detail of what had happened between him and her new fiancé. She recalled every conversation, every word, every most private moment, revealing every secret he had ever kept secret. Nothing can be hidden from this ghostly presence. The obsession became so intense that the man could not sleep. Dark circles appear under his eyes, his hands tremble, and his new relationship begins to take a heavy hit. Desperate, he turned to a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," he said, his voice trembling as he recounted his story, "the ghost of my dead wife appears every night. She knows my every action, everything I think. She repeats every conversation, word for word. I'm about to go crazy." The old Zen master listened carefully, stroking his beard contemplatively, his eyes deep but full of compassion. When the story ended, he smiled, a smile that was both gentle and contained insight. "This is actually a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such supernatural intelligence, but I'll show you how to stop haunting you." That evening, when the room became cold and a ghost appeared, the man followed the Zen master's instructions. He looked directly at the ghost and said, "You are indeed a wise soul who knows everything. You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you possess such incredible power, and I can't hide anything from you, you can certainly answer a simple question for me." The ghost, in silence, asked, "What is your question?" The man pulled out a handful of beans from his pocket and held it up in front of her. "Tell me exactly how many beans I'm holding in my hand right now," he said. For the first time since its appearance, the ghost was confused, unable to answer. Her form began to fade, swaying like morning dew in the sun, and then disappeared completely. The man was finally freed, able to continue living his life in peace. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that we are what we think. Everything we experience arises from our thoughts. The ghost in the story is nothing more than the man's guilt and psychological condition, projected outward and formed by his mind. In the practice of Zen, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what is added by the mind. The man fell in love with someone new, but guilt made him think he was a betrayer. The deceased wife is indeed no longer present, but the unresolved pain and guilt create a ghost, a virtual entity whose power only comes from his mind. The Zen master's solution was extremely simple but profound. By asking the ghost to answer a question that existed only in the present moment, he made it reveal its true nature. It was completely incapable of knowing what had not yet happened. Zen master Charlotte Juko Beck once said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They don't have to be true, they don't have to matter, and they don't have to be ours." The ghost's accusations felt real to the man, but they were only products of his own mental processes. When we look deeply into our own experiences, we realize that the ghosts we fear, the voices that doubt ourselves, are often just the creation of the mind, no more, no less. In our daily lives, we are often haunted by inner voices, reminding us of unfulfilled promises, unmet standards, or past mistakes. These voices can pretend to know it all, about our self-worth, about future decisions, about what others think of us. But their power comes entirely from our own belief in them. When we see them as they are, their power instantly dissipates. Through this story, we see that the peace we seek is not external, but in our present awareness. When we realize that ghosts are only products of the mind, we learn not to let ourselves become obsessed with them. When we live fully with the present moment, peace, clarity, and awakening are available right here and now, without waiting for special conditions or the distant future. This journey also reminds us that life's challenges are not always the enemy. When we learn to react instead of react, when we see change and loss as teachers, we discover true strength, not in resisting, but in flexibility, acceptance, and presence. Focused and undivided attention becomes a powerful tool, allowing us to transform our experience and understand the true nature of things. We have realized that the spiritual path is not to achieve something new, but to discover what is always present. Happiness, peace, wisdom. All these qualities are inherently in our nature, only temporarily overshadowed by the illusions and fears created by the mind. When we let go of what is no longer served, we make space for what nourishes the soul. When we pay attention, we recognize the miracle of the present moment, the breath, the heartbeat, the mental flow, and the feeling of being alive in every moment. The Buddha once taught, three things cannot be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. These teachings remind us that, no matter the circumstances, peace and awakening are always accessible if we are willing to recognize them. The insights we discover today are not burdens, but gentle companions that illuminate our path. As we conclude this journey, let peace, wisdom, and compassion blossom in each moment, not in the future, but right now, here. The story of the man and his ghosts reminds us that true power always lies in our own perceptions and attitudes. When we let go of our belief in ghosts, see their true nature, and live in the present moment with compassion and wisdom, we discover an absolute inner freedom, overcoming all worries, sins, or fears. Life becomes the miracle of the present experience, where every moment is an opportunity to realize the peace that always exists. And finally, as you prepare to rest, remember that these insights are not just knowledge to keep, but life reasons to experience, express, and nurture. They invite you to embrace each moment with greater presence, compassion, and wisdom. These seeds of wisdom will continue to grow in the fertile soil of everyday life, leading you on your own path. Thank you for sharing this journey. Let these timeless teachings illuminate the path ahead so that peace and awakening always accompany you, right here, right now.